Terrific, thank you. So good morning, everyone, and good evening, good afternoon to those joining from around the globe. My name is Mark Bowden. My role at Australia's Commonwealth Department of Industry, Science and Resources is to lead the strategic policy work on critical technology standards. I'd like to start by saying thank you to Chris Boddy and our colleagues at Standards Australia for the invitation and for inviting me to be here today. And it's really great to see you have a number of my colleagues from around government, both state and federal, on your speaking list today. Also, on behalf of the Commonwealth Department of Industry, Science and Resources, I'd like to welcome you all here to Sydney, Australia. I'm sorry that the weather is so cloudy. Hopefully you'll get some nice sunny weather later in the week, but I trust your travel has been smooth and I wish you all the very best for your plenary week this week. And before we begin with the presentation, if we could just move to the next slide, please. I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where we're meeting today. This is Gadigal country around Sydney, and I'd like to pay my respects to the elders, past, present, and extend that respect to any Indigenous colleagues joining us in the meeting today. Thank you. Next slide, please. So there's four key topics I'll look to take you through today to try and set the scene and provide a bit of a framework around Australia's technology policy and more specifically technology standards policy. We'll start with the critical technologies statement and then go through what we call the list of critical technologies in the national interest. And these are two really important framing documents that help to define where we focus our efforts and what we consider to be high priority work areas. We'll then go down to some publicly available documents published by Quad partners, the principles documents, and then we'll go a layer below into Australia's technology standards policy approach. Next slide, please. So the Critical Technologies Statement was first published in 2021 and then updated in 2023, and it seeks to outline how the Australian government is supporting critical technologies in the national interest. But it's also worth looking at how we define that national interest, and there are three key pillars. The first is economic prosperity, and again, to colleagues who've been working in standards for some time, it will come as no surprise that the increased uptake of these critical technologies will help to underpin future productivity growth across the entire Australian economy and also support secure, well-paid jobs. The second key pillar is social cohesion, and the statement provides a principles-based approach to critical technologies policy that helps to give us the flexibility to meet the challenges of these evolving technology ecosystems, particularly to ensure that technologies are designed in ways that are safe and responsible. And the third pillar is that of national security. So the statement helps to guide policy decision makers to help safeguard our resilience and national security interests, as well as building our ability to respond to future shocks. If you'd like a copy of the statement, it's available on the website, and I've got the link there in the presentation below. Next slide, please. So the statement also refers to the list of critical technologies in the national interest. And you can see on the slide here, there are 7 high-level fields or categories, but there are over 60 individual technologies on the list. And these fields have been selected through an extensive consultation process, and they've been selected because they have either research, intellectual or industrial strengths and capabilities that Australia wants to support and champion, or it may be technologies or services that we're importing where we need an uninterrupted access through trusted supply chains, or more broadly, where we need to either retain or a strategic capability or maintain awareness of developments in that space. But again, in your particular field is a good example, but these technologies don't necessarily map directly onto the technology standards development landscape. So it's important from when we talk about our policy work later about how we look at the cross-cutting issues and the work across various forums in this space as well. Next slide, please. So going a layer below, again, sort of further defining the policy approach and the things that we consider to be important. In 2021, Quad partners published the Principles on Technology Design, Development, Governance and Use. And there are 3 key principles here. The first is we want technology to be designed and developed in a way that supports universal values, that builds trust, integrity and resilience, and helps to foster healthy competition and, importantly, international collaboration. Now, those are quite high-level principles. So in 2023, if we just click forward, please, we published the quad principles on critical and emerging technology standards. And you'll see in a lot of our policy work this focus on industry-led, consensus-based, multi-stakeholder approaches. And that's really characteristic of the work under the ISO, but also the IEC and Joint Technical Committee 1. And we think this is really important, and we'll talk a bit more about these principles on the next slide, but to bring that diverse range of views to the table so we get really good outcomes and tech standards that are fit for purpose. The second principle is promoting standards that enable interoperability, competition, inclusiveness, and innovation. This is really critical. And thirdly, again, linking back to that messaging around social cohesion in the critical technology statement, is safe, secure, and resilient standards. So if we go to the next slide, please, we'll dig into these a little bit more. So industry-led, consensus-based, multi-stakeholder, again, very familiar concepts to all of you, but we see this, we being Australian government, sees this as really important because we really need to reflect the depth of experience and expertise across industry, researchers and civil society to ensure that we get those high-quality, fit-for-purpose standards. The second principle is also important, particularly around interoperability and competition from Australia's perspective. We see with the broad, diverse array of international standards development organisations working on technology standards topics, there's a growing challenge to help prevent duplication of work, but also of effort across those forums. And if we take that to its logical end, ultimately duplication of standards work can lead to technology bifurcation. So from Australia's perspective, we are generally a net importer of many of these technology products and services, and so it's really important that we have interoperability of those products and services, but also a good level playing field to ensure that it's competitive, that we can get good value for money, but also to help ensure that diversity of supply chains and choice in the market. And the third is technology standards on safety, security and resilience. Again, we really want to make sure that these technologies are not being misused or abused, and particularly as that importer of technology, to prevent them causing harm to those end users. And that's a really important role for Australian advocacy in the international standards space. Next slide, please. So if we go one level lower into Australian government's tech standards policy approach, so as I mentioned at the start, that work is led by my team out of the Department of Industry, Science and Resources, but it absolutely requires really close collaboration across a broad array of government agencies and stakeholders, but also with industry, researchers and civil society to make sure that we're doing things in a coordinated way, but we've got all those voices in the discussion. And there are four key elements to our policy approach. We've worked really hard to build good, close relationships with all of our industry or non-governmental stakeholders on these topics. We've looked to coordinate government activities across agencies, particularly those technical agencies within government where they're able to add value and bring expertise to the table. We've got a number of key international partnerships in and outside of those international forums, whether that's through the UN International Telecommunication Union, which is sort of government-led, but we absolutely want those industry and civil society voices as part of the discussion, or whether it's through other bilateral and multilateral agreements and cooperation on technology policy and standards topics. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, to be a source of information for government and industry stakeholders, both for those experts within government who may be able to contribute and add value to the multi-stakeholder process to help find them pathways to engage and support your work, but also for industry to have a voice and access to government decision makers and policy makers so that we can make sure the policy settings we're putting in place are fit for purpose and able to enable and support your work. So finally, just to kind of link some of those more abstract policy principles into the work of TC 211, your work plays a really important role in helping to solve a number of Australia's national challenges. And as I alluded to at the start, incorporates a broad array of those critical technology fields, whether that's geospatial imaging standards, helping to optimise urban design, analysing traffic patterns and infrastructure usage. And if you've spent more than a few days in Sydney, you'll know we need all the help we can get when it comes to traffic management here. From an agriculture perspective, optimising crop yields, monitoring soil health. Agriculture is a major export product from an Australian perspective, so any enhancements and improvements we can make there are really valuable. or tracking changes in water quality and quantity with remote sensing technologies. And again, Australia is a large country. We have a broad array of climates here, but many of them will be low in water. And so having good understanding, visibility and data to those resources is really critical from a national perspective. So with that, I will say thank you again, and thank you to Alan for the invitation to speak here today. Very happy to take questions, but I also want to wish you all the best for the rest of your week. Thank you.
Anybody have any questions for Mark at all? I've got a question for you, Mark. So in the UK, we obviously try and influence government policy with standards as well. And we've actually went a stage further, and we actually have a national geospatial data standard register. Is that something that you have in Australia or something that you would consider?
Thanks, Alan. I think there might be some colleagues from Geoscience Australia who are joining the meeting later today who might be able to speak some more to the specifics of that. But certainly the benefit of that direct relationship with industry, and I might use AI as an example, has been really valuable in determining, in terms of Australia's response to the rollout and the growth of and use of AI in Australia has involved a lot of co-design in those policy frameworks and bringing in experts both from the standards space, but also those other civil society experts into the discussion to make sure that any of those settings, or whether that's the standards we're referring to in future or potential regulatory environments, are all well coordinated and have that multi-stakeholder view in mind.
Thanks very much, Mark. Any other questions? Thank you. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much.